put all those pieces together. It relates to how we think about our streets for multimodal, the characteristics of the streets in a multimodal way that's both supportive of pedestrians, cyclists, and managing how we deal with vehicles. Think about the development on those sides. So I'll talk about in a minute the idea that intensity is important, and we may even want to kind of raise our expectations about intensity in South End. And design quality. If you don't spend too much, if you look at this image too quickly, you miss the nuance of the things like how we deal with the ground floor, making sure that we really do have active uses, and the parking structures and the infrastructure of parking is put in its place, and we shape urban environments with active street level design and uses, that we have streetscape and urban investment that matches that, and ultimately we're creating a place that is conducive to kind of the activity and vibrancy of mixed-use development, residential, office, commercial, all done in a way that's walkable and achieve the vision for South End. Here's another example. If you take sort of a step back, this will be a great partnership with the county. So this is South Tryon Street. There's a location here for the Wilmore Centennial Park. This is an investment that the county is currently planning on making. This gives you a sense of how we would shape that public investment in the park, the open space, to the expectations for development around it. This will be a shining example of how you take that urban investment, make sure that we've got design guidelines and development that shapes around it. You've got new streets and connectivity, kind of an urban park that connects and is addressed by the development around it. The intensity of development, as you see, is kind of now thought of a little bit differently. You'd end up with an urban place, a new urban park in place that captures the ideas that we're hearing from the community about new and more open space and public space, activity, intensity, and development that's mixed use around it. That would be, again, a great example of public space and public investment in South End that we haven't seen yet in terms of the public nature of it, and really getting development standards and guidelines and the intensity to match to that public investment. This one more thing I want to share starts to get a little bit more technical in the weeds, but it is an important next step, and one thing that you will be seeing some more on in the next year or so is this idea of a new crossing of the LRT system. Shown here in red, this new crossing sort of sits between the east-west and the new Burn station. If you're familiar, it's essentially where the new Publix is. The issue there is there's a large gap, the two streets north and south of it. It's well over a half-mile distance before you can actually get across the LRT line to the east or the west side. So CATS is already working on the design and feasibility of a pedestrian crossing. There's funding to do that. And in addition to that, one of the ideas that came out of this is long-term, what if that was potentially a location for a new station. So part of the work that we're doing with CATS will be to test the feasibility of that. Think about what it would mean for development around it. Would it open up a whole set of new opportunities that wouldn't be there without the station, guided by the standard? It's a great location for that new connection from a pedestrian standpoint, and could be a very strategic public investment that would unlock against some potential long-term for South End. What now I want to do is transition to a couple of issues, just to give you a flavor of...
Excuse me, got a question. Thanks.
Can you go back to the last slide? I've asked this question before, and it's really just I'm trying to come up the learning curve. Given what we're doing with the UDO and the amount of time it's going to take, if we know this is our vision plan, then can we not interject in the UDO process and get those zoning districts correct now and then do a corrective rezoning? Because it just feels like there's too much time that's going to pass between when we approve these vision plans and we get something rewritten, and then we need to do corrective rezonings to get it set in stone. Otherwise, large chunks of land are lost. And I mean, I drove up South Boulevard this weekend, and it just makes me cringe to see, a huge parking lot with a gas station and a storage facility right next to it across the street from a car vending machine. As long as those are zoned that way, they're gonna build that way while we're taking our, time to work through a very complicated process. But, so is there any incremental things that we can do?
There is, so it's a perfect segue to a couple of things I do want to talk about now, but I'll mention it sort of more broadly is we are, as part of the work that we're doing on the UDO, we are specifically working today on an update to the TOD zoning districts that we have in place. And so, as you mentioned, what's out there now on the ground are our current, where it's been rezoned, we have our current TOD zoning in place in many of the sites around those stations. What we have realized through sort of the lessons learned in the past 10 years or so was all this notion of that those districts probably don't get us the design expectations that we have. They potentially don't give us the kind of intensity that we want. They don't on the development side. We haven't correctively rezoned and kind of opened up, set the standards and opened up essentially a by right condition with a clear sense of what our expectations are. Those are all goals now that we have in the update of this TOD zoning district. Our plan is to do that essentially, to your point, concurrent to this larger work we're doing on the UDO, knowing that if we can, building upon a plan like this, if we can embed the expectations and the aspirations that we have for TOD in those new zoning districts while we're currently working on the UDO, we can get those zoning districts adopted, and we can essentially do what you're saying with council support, is go out there and proactively put those regulations and increase entitlements on the ground so that we have surety about what will happen out there.
And what would be a realistic expectation to have that done?
We are, and we've got a draft out there of the first couple of those new TOD zoning districts. Our goal right now is to hopefully have kind of a vetted and thoughtful set of drafts for those districts in front of council, if not later this year, early part of next year, with the notion that let's get those districts amended and adopted quickly while we know the development that's happening, not just in South End, but obviously
wherever we have an updated vision and have mapped it out.
Right, and that goes back to my point earlier as to why this plan was important. We knew that this would be a great opportunity to set in this plan those expectations that would give us some foundation for the work that we would do in the new TOD zoning district. It won't be, so we to kind of manage expectations. It is an important goal for us to get those districts drafted. We have drafts out there. We've been working with our advisory committee as we speak on those drafts. But as you will see as we get farther and farther into it, that once we get into the weeds of those zoning districts, there's a lot of work that has to be done with our community and our development partners and council to really vet the details of it. So it's not an easy process, but we recognize the sense of urgency.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I know that this is not the first time we've talked about corrective rezonings in the Transportation Planning Committee. I know it was an effort early on in Northeast Charlotte along the University City Blue Line to have corrective rezonings. Unlike, I guess, South End, you had people rushing to the Planning Commission with, anxious to get things zoned TOD. So there were no corrective rezonings that I'm aware of along the South Line. Everybody came there, and in some instances, we paid for the actual rezonings in a lot of cases. So when we were discussing what corrective rezonings for University City, I mean, we had B1 stuff, B2, and it really wasn't an appetite. I mean, we wanted to use moral suasion to persuade people to adopt the vision of the TOD zoning concept. So now you're saying even with the TOD zoning concept, we've noticed some things that are limiting the implementation of how we want to have a vision for the area. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'll give you just one example of that, which is a pretty big driver for the new structure for the TOD zoning districts we've had. So essentially what we have today is sort of a one-size-fits-all TOD zoning district. It varies by kind of use mix, but essentially the intensity of the standards are all the same. What we've learned, particularly around, it's more noticeable even on the university city stations, is one size does not fit all given the kind of conditions that are out there. Even stations themselves are different, and then key geographies even within those station areas are different in terms of their relationship to neighborhoods and relationships to infrastructure. So we are designing the new updates to the zoning districts to be kind of a sort of a spectrum of districts that get more intense and have kind of a scaled down version of how you would entitle development based on where it sits relative to the station or how its relationship to adjacent neighborhoods, so that we have essentially a more nuanced set of tools that would allow us to more effectively entitle the kind of unique context of each station. We've got enough work in our station area plans to give us that guidance. We just didn't really have the right set of zoning tools to make that happen. And again, a good example is think about a station in NODA and its relationship, its tight relationship to the neighborhoods around it, compared to University City Boulevard Station, which is a larger commercial greenfield. Those two things are so different. We recognize that our zoning districts really needed to be tailored in a way that would reflect that. So it gives you a sense of, with those tools, it is our expectation that then we could, with community support, with council support, be out there ultimately, correctively rezoning where we think it's important.
Just to move forward. So I've been a big fan, an advocate of piloting the UDO place type concept. So I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, I think what a great opportunity where a vision plan is fresh and brand new. My only question would be, given the fact that I'm assuming a corrective rezoning of sorts in this area we'd see less gas stations and parking decks, storage facilities, and we'd see more mixed use that would be higher density, taller, things of that nature. So question one is that a fair assumption given what we'd see in the corrective rezoning? And two, and most importantly, have we connected it to the severely lagging infrastructure that we know is already, well known in this part of town, citywide, when we look at some of the challenges that we've seen in the development that's there today?
Maybe the second question first. I know where we are working with Charlotte Water, and any changes, that would be based on, the kind of recalibration of our zoning districts will be, direct partnership with them to make sure that we all understand what the infrastructure ramifications of that might be. It'll be an important part of how we ensure the calibration of that entitlement is done in a way that's transparent about what kind of infrastructure needs to be in place. So that'll be an ongoing effort that we would need as we do the updates to the zoning district. I guess to your question about the corrective, the way I guess I would describe it is, if we could get to a set of standards we all are comfortable with, right? Neighborhoods, council, everybody has confidence in the outcome of what those entitlements are. And then the notion is to get it on the ground. It's not to say that the zoning doesn't change the market, right? It doesn't magically make things happen, but it would give us and give you and the community a sense of confidence about what will happen and what can happen in those places given the infrastructure that we put in place. It's important, back to kind of reiterate my point about this kind of spectrum of zoning districts, because I think we do have to recognize that there will be places stations and places that will be more intense and places that would be less intense. So we want to be clear about what those expectations are, and so that, again, we have a more context-sensitive set of zoning tools with clarity, but know that, again, the market, one size does not fit all at every station, and we want to be clear that not everything is going to be, not every place will be this high-density mixed use. We've got some key places where that should happen and believe it could be happening, and we have standards that we want to put in place, but we've got to make sure we've got tools that reflect the kind of range of conditions in those stations.
Nobody's out of compliance per se on day one of something like that. If you're doing something that's inconsistent with your new zoning that's been overlaid, you're grandfathered until another zoning or something else happens. Is that true?
Well, you know, this is a whole other topic that we need to spend some time on, but you know, if we were to take, in the abstract sense, a gas station, we believe long term that that's an important part of the station and wants to be something else. If we put TOD zoning on it, essentially there would be, it'd be a non-conforming situation that once they reinvest, you know, or redevelop,
Yeah.
those rules will kick in. But it will be, those will be the kinds of things you would see in front of council, where those landowners will be saying to you and to us and for us to consider is that, you know, some of the argument might be that the market isn't there yet, and you're putting these kinds of expectations on a site that maybe for the next 10 or 15 years still wants to be a gas. Those are the kinds of debates that we'll be having, and why the corrective rezoning issue has always, we need to be very thoughtful and careful about how we go into it, so that we are confident about the, you know, the ramifications of what we're putting on the ground.
And that's one of the things that I've always struggled with, but even, it sounds so innocuous that we could just wave a wand and says, we want to collectively rezone it, but does that infer that the property owners that's going to willfully give up their entitlements because of the vision that you see? I mean, if they say, I got this property and I want a gas station here, and if you want something different, then either you buy it from me, but are you going to arbitrarily wave a wand and it just changes my entitlements without a fight?
That is the core debate,
Right.
this whole UDO, our whole vision, right? And you have those debates, you know, Monday nights at zoning, you know, parcel by parcel, you're having that debate. The idea of place types, a vision like this in South End, is let's get clear about what that vision is. Let's make sure we've got tools, our zoning districts, our TOD zoning districts, to implement that vision. And then let's have the debate at the vision level and ensure that we entitle the land in a way that's consistent with that vision, so that you don't completely eliminate, but you minimize these kind of very one-off kind of discussions that you have zoning case by zoning case. But there will be lots of debate about the ramifications of what you would put on the ground.
Right.
With TOD, I mean, a lot of the argument will be is, you know, TOD gives you a tremendous amount of entitlement, right? So that's a gift. In addition to the gift that we've made in the $1 billion worth of infrastructure, now the entitlement needs to be designed to make sure that we get back, you know, at a level of design and community building expectations that are, you know, equal to that gift. That's really what essentially the debate about TOD will be.
So, I got another question. So how long has this plan been in its formative stages? How long has this been going on, the South End Vision Plan?
It's been about 1.5 years. As you recall, our last big public event was last summer. We finalized and put together the draft report that you all have about early fall of last year. And then we've been working out with the Planning Commission and going through the adoption process. So it's been about 1.5 years.
Okay. Now, you said in one of your first bullets that this was a demonstration project for place types. Are there any other plans that you might be aware of that you could say the same thing for?
Well, I mean, this leads into a discussion about place type, but would certainly argue that many of our recent plans, the ones you're very familiar with, like Prosperity or University City, are you know, kind of foundations for a lot of the work that we're doing in place type. So there are, you know, our current plans and some of our more recent plans have been evolving to get into the kind of description and aspiration that we want, and now working to embed in the place types policies that we have. This happens just to be the most recent, and one that's, you know, related to an area where we're seeing a lot of development activity.
So, another question. So would it be a fair statement then to say that the kind of planning and things we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years it's been driving us up to this point now in of how we want to envision the UDO process work. I mean, this, to me, I've been seeing the work of University City Partners. They've been raising the design bar, design quality, activation of ground floor spaces, parking decks. So to me, I don't see it as nothing new as opposed to something that's been going on, but it's more or less trying to get the whole city and communities to gravitate to that point. So is this something really new, or is this an extension of something that we've already been doing and testing over the last 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, I definitely believe it's the latter. It's you know, we've been our staff and you know, the planning work that we've done in the last couple of years has been around that evolution of getting to defining the vision that we have for all the places that we have in Charlotte, right? And then ensuring that we've got that defined, a vocabulary around that, a set of policies that are adopted and clear with you, that don't necessarily are, you know, that are broad enough that give us ability to, you know, understand what we're trying to create throughout the city and make sure we got zoning. Back to the UDO, we got zoning as a way to implement it. So, yes, and I think all of that is built to why we believe place type work is really important. These recent plans have been part of that evolution for sure.
And we've had stakeholders a part of this visioning exercise in these plans for over these 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. No, if you're making the point that, you know, part of the engagement that we've done on these area plans is engagement that's valuable to the broader place type work. We have more to do on that for sure, but we're learning, you know, we're building a pretty solid foundation for what, you know, the expectations are in many of our areas that need to be embedded in these broader place type policies.
Okay, I don't know where we are in this, but I think...
Well, I won't say, I know we're
Okay.
probably running short. I can kind of cut this next.
So one, if there's an action on here, I'm not comfortable with recommending this adoption to City Council right now. Number one, I really haven't spent much time with staff learning about this. Nobody has reached out to me outside of when we had a presentation in our action briefing or right here today. I know I got a South End Vision Plan in the mail, but I haven't really talked through this with anybody. Second of all, I just question why we are putting so many resources, so much effort into an area that's already built out. I know you said there's a lot of opportunity, but I walked up from the New Bern Station to East-West Boulevard just this Friday, and I agree that there does need to be another crossing and another station there. But as I walked up, you know, I mean, this area lacks incredible diversity, whether that be cultural diversity or it seems like a place for young folks. As we know that we are going to age in the city, I don't see where that is being addressed. As I look at the top 10 key initiatives of this plan, some of the most important things that we recognize in our city are just not in there. The desegregation of our city, first of all, and this has become one of the most, anecdotally speaking, I guess, one of the most segregated places, like I said, at least multicultural, diverse areas of the city that I know of. And, you know, I question the wisdom. Again, like you say, we deal with these vision plans and during rezonings every third Monday. I question the wisdom of passing another one of these that when we really do lack a vision of this city, an entire city plan. We continue to piecemeal this together. This doesn't really address the greatest need that we have as I'm going through it, the lack of affordable housing in this city. It even really pretty much says that we're not going to really pursue that. We're going to pursue affordable living so that you don't have to have a car, and we kind of brush on workforce housing, but we definitely don't touch on low income, extremely low income affordable housing. I just think this is, it seems to be another step on how we've not really taken steps to develop our city in a way that's equitable for most Charlotteans. You know, we put a massive investment in the Blue Line down there, but we pretty much said, you know, let the market take its course, and that's what has happened there, I guess. I just question why we are putting so much public effort and energy and dollars into this when it's already built up, and there's so many other areas that, and we need to really look at this expanded Charlotte plan. It doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment to that. When the Urban Land Institute was here last year, they commented on South Park and how we weren't looking at that properly, that we weren't making enough investment in an area where you're going to grow your tax base. And the South End is an area where we're going to grow our tax base if it's done right. We put a tremendous, to your point, we put a tremendous investment in transit in the South End, and to leave it half-baked is just not making the most of our investment. So this is, a lot of this is, to me, about transit-oriented development. And we've got to focus on how we are getting the most out of the hundreds of millions of dollars that we're investing in these transit plans. And I hear your point, but then we need to start talking about the city or the schools or the county buying land around there to put affordable housing in there.
That's another good point. We don't. You're talking about putting all these houses in here. You talk about working with the county to put all these apartments in. You talk about working with the county to put a park. But where's the talk about putting schools in here?
Well,
that tells me that we're not really looking at families. We're looking at, again, this tax base is another way of saying wealthy people and not people that need the most help right now in our city.
But I don't think that precludes us from doing that. You know, we just spent 5 hours on Friday afternoon talking about ways that we could use our Housing Trust Fund and other dollars to, through the Away Home program, to subsidize housing.
The Way Home program would not, where would you find anything to put people in a way home in this vision plan?
Well, I mean, you know, that's where we're going to have some political will around buying land or putting more Housing Trust Fund dollars into here. But you've got to have a plan to begin with, because we're saying we want people to be able to live in high opportunity areas. Well, if you're undercutting high opportunity areas, then nothing gets done right. So.
But we're not saying that we're trying to do that in here. We're promoting workforce housing, and the discussion can be pretty passionate around who needs workforce housing, but there is no discussion about the 50% and below in here at all.
Well, one of the things in here that I noticed on the section 5, when they talked about, I guess, these comments, preserve and provide affordable workplaces, I guess the key language for me is they're looking for an opportunity for a discussion, you know, a discussion about affordable housing. And I guess there's been plenty of discussions about the lack of affordable housing along the south line of the Blue Line extension. So yeah, I'm curious as to, you know, how we're going to go from discussion to action with regard to affordable housing in an area that's built out like that. So that was one of the key things I saw in this highlighted version right here.
Sure.
But okay, Mr. Eagleson. Excellent.
Sorry, we're only 5 months in. You'll get it eventually.
Lock it.
Ed, so Braxton's talking about recommending adoption of this, which looks like based on this we would do potentially at our next scheduled TAP meeting. Do you anticipate there being any material change to what we're looking at today for our May 29th meeting?
There is. So I didn't, and I wasn't planning to go through this in any detail, and part of our discussion today was getting additional comments from council. This represents the level of detail and conversation we've been having with the Planning Commission. you've already mentioned one example of that. So where we are working to update the plan to address as many of these issues as makes sense.
But the material change that would take place between now and May 29th is reflected in this red font.
Correct.
Hold on.
In addition to the comments, in addition to the discussion that we're having, obviously now with you and the committee. And the intent is to update, address, and answer as many of those questions as we think makes that we can, and get that draft back to both the commission and the council, so that we can ultimately go to adoption of the plan.
Thank you.
But I mean, again, just to emphasize that that's exactly what the conversation we've been having with the commission is. It's not just sort of rubber stamping the ideas. We're actually having some very specific and detailed conversation, and we're going to spend some time thinking through and responding to those issues.
Mr. Braxton.
Yeah, well, Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, we made this investment and we have to focus on transit-oriented development, but the biggest knock on South End is that it's developed in a way where the people that most need transportation have not able to live in those areas that it serves. So, we talk about in here, increasing density, but again, it just seems like density of a certain tax bracket. I think we need to, this vision plan, although I think it needs to really work in context of a greater Charlotte vision plan, which we don't have, and I'm not really working on, has to address how do we get folks into, it's already a very dense area when you walk up and down that rail trail. How do we increase not just the density, but the density of the spectrum of mixed incomes in there, from 0 to 100 plus. I think that's the only way, if we're really truly sincere about where we want to go as a city, every vision plan has to kind of address that, including the South End vision plan.
Part of it too is we have and probably need to strengthen the connecting of the dots in this plan to broader work we're doing as a city. So we've got our comprehensive housing strategy that's in the works as part of that. So you bring up a good point. We need to be crystal clear about how this plan connects those dots and is furthering supporting those goals, albeit those are tough challenges citywide that don't rest just with a place like South End. It's tied to some broader public investment and broader strategies we have about housing throughout the city that don't just get solved in one location.
Mr. Bukhari.
I agree with Mr. Winston in the fact that aside from getting the plan in the mail and then seeing maybe 2 presentations, I haven't gone personally very deep, so that might be something to think about as a takeaway. My question is, how would you characterize, of all the parties, the neighbors, the people who live in this area and the businesses that operate there, how much their input, not just kind of showing up to random meetings and hearing a presentation, but actually crafting this plan? Was that a significant weight? And if I walked around with the plan and just knocked on doors, how many people would know what I'm talking about? And of those who do, would say, we're in 100% support, we put this together.
Well, I mean, you saw, I'll answer a couple ways, and maybe I'll let Michael Smith and others who have been partners on this, answer some more. But you saw an example of that at the public hearing. So we put together a steering committee that led through the life of this plan that represented, property owners, neighborhood organizations, business owners, churches, other institutions, sort of the spectrum of the residents and owners and people who live and work in South End. They were hands-on, a part of that process, and were selected specifically to give us that kind of input. Knowing that having that kind of strategic input is one of the best ways to get that kind of broader understanding. In addition to the larger public events that we had, we had well over 300 or 400 participants in the big public events that we had that we absolutely got direct engagement on and got real input on. And you you can always do more, you can always, the word probably is never fully, you can always be communicating and getting the word out. That I would argue we've got a very good representation of the intent and vision for something from those residents and participants.
Yeah, what we heard from the neighbors is that they felt like, I'm sorry,
You have to come to the table, introduce yourself.
Come to the table and introduce yourself for the record.
all right. Look,
Yes.
Michael Smith, Charlotte Center City Partners. Thanks for the invitation and for the debate and analysis of something that's as big a step as this is. So to the first question, I think this is actually an example of best practice of pulling neighbors together and hearing from them on what are their aspirations for the place. We've struggled in the South End of the need to raise the bar for about the last 5 years. The design bar, I mean, what you guys are considering right now, because the neighbors, the existing property owners, were saying that we want to do more, but then an investor who would consider it would say, I'd love to make this investment here. You've captured lightning in a bottle, but I have no assurances what's going to happen next door to me, so therefore capital won't come. And I think the point on affordable housing is part of the reason why we want this plan. We want to be intentional about it. Where right now, the standards that we have in place, it is just a free market move. And I think it's a reason to do this, that we need to make sure that is captured and clearly articulated, and that we then make investments and we have policies that support the fulfillment of that vision. Because it is a place that where the right arm's gotten strong, so now we ought to develop the left arm as well. I mean, I completely concur.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? So you have up there a May 29th visit back here. So, if that was occur, are you saying then that there will be more work on this document before us? What will change between now and somebody is
So we're in the process of essentially updating the draft plan document based on
these comments?
comments that you have in front of you, and certainly based on at least the initial discussion that we've had here today, and we'll certainly follow up, and it's concurrent to that, follow up with council members to make sure that we've got all the input and direction that we want to get from council, and update the plan. So the goal is we want to essentially finalize the plan, do the next drafting iteration of that plan, make sure that we're, again, targeted on, crystal clear about the kinds of issues and questions that you have about the intent of this plan. So our goal, it's aggressive, so our goal in the next couple weeks is to do that, to get a new version of this plan out by May, on this calendar of May 7th, so that then you, again, will have, you can see the changes and the way that we've addressed the issues in the plan, and then we can have a conversation and follow a discussion about that at your next TAP committee meeting.
Good. I think, given the tenor of the discussion, that's probably the way that we want to proceed. And as much as we won't take action to recommend at this meeting, but wait until the May meeting and I would encourage all my colleagues to blow the dust off their plan and read it thoroughly and just offer up any comments to planning staff for consideration as we can. And that message will go out to the rest of the council members too, because by that next meeting, we want to move it forward. I mean, I know all of these plans are aspirational. Some of them could be ideological. I don't know that we could really solve. I mean, it's a good effort, but I don't know if we could solve a lot of the social ills by just having a plan in place, like a vision. I mean, it's good to have, but some of these issues might be something that's going to require, I don't know, just a lot of work by a lot of people. But at least if you have the vision there, and we can all push towards the same aspirations. So I know we've probably exceeded our 45 minutes on this, and I know we got a couple more areas to go in the agenda. So with that said, I think this was a very productive conversation, and I look forward to scrutinizing further the entire booklet plan that we have, each of us has in our possession, so we won't have to come back and say, well, I hadn't had a chance to look at it like I should. So I would hope I would challenge the rest of the committee members to go ahead and take that plan and give it another thorough read. So with that said, I guess we can proceed with the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott Curry is going to just walk you through very briefly an item that's on your business agenda this evening, and that is the amendments to Chapter 19 resulting from the Charlotte Walks plan.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question before you go into that I think will help me at least. I didn't see in here exactly what our explicit definition of thoroughfares is as it relates to this topic, so I think that's a helpful thing to define before we start.
Sure. Yeah, I can start with that, and then I'll get into the rest of the FAQ. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Scott Curry, I'm your pedestrian program manager. I work for CDOT. To answer your question about thoroughfares, a thoroughfare is any street that's designated on the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization's most recently adopted thoroughfare plan. So there are regional partners that we work with to define what is and is not a thoroughfare. And that's a publicly available document that you can look up on their website. It's consistent with how we define a thoroughfare elsewhere in the ordinance.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Right.
In speaking to the public, as opposed to, I guess, get a list of them, and I have a general anecdotal sense of what is and isn't, but would it be fair to say that anything where we're looking at a 40+ mile/hour speed limit would be considered a thoroughfare? Anything that's 4 travel lanes?
Yep, that's pretty accurate. So it's our higher speed, higher volume streets. It's places like West Boulevard, Albemarle Road, Fairview Road, Harris Boulevard, Central Avenue. Those are all thoroughfares.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation for you all, partially because I was with you last on April 9th as a part of your council action review to give you a recap on the Charlotte Walks sidewalk amendments. And so what we've done is put together a list of 12 frequently asked questions that we've been getting, and I imagine some of you all may have been getting related to the sidewalk amendments. So I wanted to highlight a couple of those questions from this handout sheet that you all have. The first one that I'm going to point your attention to is the second question, which is what happened at the November public hearing and why was the affordable housing reimbursement mechanism introduced into this conversation. So this is an issue that has been in front of council several times before, most recently on November 27th. Prior to that, on November 13th, we had a public hearing. 8 speakers came out in support of the proposed sidewalk amendments at that time, including folks from American Heart Association, Metroline Association for the Blind, Sustain Charlotte, and a group of students from Queen's University. We had one speaker express some concerns about affordable housing and potential impacts on affordable housing. And so the council at that time asked us to work with the affordable housing developers to address any potential concerns that they have. And so since that time, we've been working with the affordable housing development community to make sure that there aren't any additional financial impacts on affordable housing projects. That explains the introduction of this affordable housing reimbursement mechanism. And so we worked out that mechanism with them, and I understand that they've now sent you all a letter of support for the proposed amendments, which is why we're bringing this back to council now. I also want to mention that in total we've met with the development community 6 times over the last 2 years on these sidewalk amendments. We've been with DSTAC, which is our Development Services Technical Advisory Committee. We've been with that group 4 times. They're the group that is sort of the sounding board for issues like this. We've been with the UDO Advisory Committee once, and then we met specifically with Affordable Housing Development Community members once. So those were the 6 times. I also want to point your attention, if you flip to the next sheet, question number 5, why were these specific thresholds chosen? In trying to close the 2 loopholes that were identified in the Charlotte Walks pedestrian plan, we had to pick thresholds to draw that line somewhere for where sidewalks would be upgraded with new development. I mentioned already that over the past 2 years, we've